Final word with Adam Collins. I have down the screen with me today in West London, an opener with over 13,000 first-class runs to his name, 3,600s at that level as well. A Sydney boy who grew up with the great and the good of Australian cricket, but a player who's made a name for himself in this country, representing England in 7 Test matches in 2014. Middlesex's senior pro these days, preparing to start season number 16 at Lord's, and also about to celebrate his testimonial season at the club. One of the most thoughtful and interesting players on the England circuit. Sam Robson, welcome to the final word.
Thanks for having me, Adam. Good to be a guest today.
Yeah, I mean, we've done these types of chats in other mediums, I suppose, before, print interviews and whatnot, but this felt like great timing to speak to you, given, as I mentioned before, testimonial year, new season, Middlesex having finished the year pretty well in 2024, coming ever so close to promotion. I mean, what's the vibe like as you start another campaign, those cold practice matches, the hand warmers and so on? And I suppose you're very familiar with all of that now.
Yep, everything you said there. Very exciting. Excited to get started. I think everyone, you sort of get to March and it just sort of really kicks off for all the county players, training hard and in most days of the week. At Middlesex this year, we've had the marquee up at Merchant Taylor's School where we do most of our training when we're not at Lord's, which is a great facility. It sort of replicates, well, it gets as close as you can really to early season English conditions, but it's a lot better than being in the indoor school. So that's been great practice. We've got outside the last week or so, which has been good because the weather, touch wood, has been all right so far. And you do, to be honest, you sort of get to the point where you're just ready to start playing. You almost get netted out a bit. You're in the nets and you're hitting a lot of balls and the guys are getting their overs in and, you're doing a bit of catching, albeit I don't think this, early season English weather, it couldn't be worse for slips catching. So you're sort of praying that they don't come, to be honest, in these pre-season practice games, which is probably not the right attitude really. But yeah, we're ready to go now. It's exciting. First up at Lord's next Friday. Lancashire, one of the big famous counties, so they normally get a good crowd, or they're well supported. So yeah, should be good fun.
And that knowledge that you'll be walking out of those famous gates at Lord's, down the pavilion, steps and all the rest of it, and it's going to be that bloke called James Anderson who's played more test matches and taken more test wickets at that ground than anyone else, who'll be opening the bowling for Lancashire.
It'll be a great challenge. I played Jimmy a couple of times before in county cricket. I don't think you need me to say, how good a bowler he is and whatever. But no, look, I think it is good. I think early season English county cricket, you want the big names. Sometimes in recent years, maybe with the IPL and the way the game's gone with cricket all over the world, it hasn't always had that quite like the way maybe it did 10, 15, 20 years ago. First game of the season, Jimmy Anderson already turning up at Lord's a few times to drop kit off and wander around stewards and people at the ground. They're already talking it up because he's a big name and he's going to attract some more support. So no, it's going to be exciting start to the year.
There's that old adage about when you've got two countries, you have no country, and that it can be difficult when you sort of have a foot in two camps. And obviously, you and I share that in common, having both lived in the UK for a long time, but having roots back in Australia. Like, do you feel these days when you front up for a new season, obviously you've played for England, but do you feel English in a manner of speaking, or when you're standing in the slips on a cold day, does the antipathy and blood still feel pretty thick?
I don't think it matters where you've grown up. Standing at first and second slip when it's 6 degrees or something stupid like it was a couple of years ago in Durham, that's always freezing. Don't worry about that. But look, I suppose as an adult, like my whole adult life has been here really. As we were chatting just before we went on air, I still get back to Sydney most years. I went back for 6 weeks, the winter gone, which was good. I played a couple of games for Eastern Suburbs in Sydney, so I enjoy doing that in the off seasons when I can. Look, for cricketing purposes, and as I said, I think it's I think I came in 2008. I don't think, I know I came in 2008, and here we are now, 2025. So
Mm.
yeah, I think when I sort of started on that cricketing journey, I didn't really know where it would take me. I don't think anyone does when they're 18, but yeah, it is incredible really to think that, 17, 18 years later, I'm 35 and still playing for Middlesex. It's amazing. So yeah, I mean, Lords, walking out at Lords is your home ground. It doesn't really get any better than that as a
Mm.
domestic player. So been very lucky, and hopefully I can keep doing it for a few more years.
So let's go back to the start of your cricketing journey, which is such an interesting one. Always taken a close interest in how it's all played out for you, not least because, as we said before, you are of Australian stock, Paddington boy. You went to big schools in Sydney, and then you've got this family backstory with your dad having played over here. Just fill in the gaps of that, how your family have been both Australian and English.
Yeah, well, I had the English passport initially through my mother. My mother's family were born in Nottingham, actually. So that sort of was my route in initially. My father, yeah, as you said, Dad played grade cricket in Sydney for 20 years. Well, played first grade for 20 years. He kept playing lower grades until he was 50. So yeah, when I was 14, yeah, shared a dressing room with him, which is an interesting experience. Yeah, you grow up, that's for sure, pretty quickly, when you're sort of 14, 15 around men all the time. So that was a sort of good cricketing education, playing lower grade cricket at that age. So yeah, my father was involved, loved playing, always heavily involved in the game. He was a New South Wales Sheffield Shield selector around, I'm going to say the year 2000, 2001, when I was about 11 or 12. So I remember going to watch sort of first grade cricket games in Sydney on a Saturday afternoon when he'd meet the other selectors and all that sort of stuff. That was before Australian cricket was as professional as it is now in terms of, full time coaches and
Mm.
staff and all that sort of thing. So yeah, we were always around the game a lot as kids and teenagers. As a teenager, I followed county cricket closely, so I followed domestic cricket here even when I was growing up in Australia. So I sort of knew what it was all about and was very interested in it. And then, yeah, I played grade cricket with Tim Murtagh in about 2006 or 2007 when I was about 17 in Sydney. And yeah, the year after I finished school, came over, played club cricket in Surrey for Normandy, and through Mertz, got involved at Middlesex, played a couple of second 11 games, did all right. And then it sort of went from there. And then, yeah, after a few years, you just sort of live for the day and take everything in your stride at that age, but became more and more entrenched in the cricketing system here and playing for Middlesex. And then, yeah, I mean, living with your mates, we had a flat in Golders Green, which was, well, it was a bit of a disgrace at times, student sort of lodgings. I think my mum came over one year and I think she was horrified by what she saw. But no, it was great fun living with your mates. 15-minute tube journey from Leicester Square, and you're training at Lords and playing cricket, 4 or 5 days a week. It doesn't get much better when you love cricket and you're 18, 19. So, yeah.
Interesting. I mean, that's true, and that all makes a lot of sense. But there's another side to this as well, isn't there? That you played New South Wales 17s and 19s. You're in the Australian under 19s team as well, and played a number of times in that side with players such as Hazelwood and Stark and Philip Hughes, Nathan Coulter-Nile, James Faulkner. It's a pretty impressive generation that you came through with. But that's the other path that you could have easily taken, given that you had your dad with his relationships there in New South Wales cricket already. You were part of the establishment, really, an insider. You would have been well placed to have gone on and had a career with New South Wales at some stage, right? So that's not the easiest call to make, to travel to the other side of the world to take up a professional career, even if you weren't getting those opportunities straight away with the Blues.
Yeah, I had a rookie contract with New South Wales when I came over, actually. So I think I was 18. I just signed a rookie contract in New South Wales at the time. And as you said, I played youth cricket for Australia the year before. So I'd been to state training a few times. I played in like a second 11 Colts game, one game against Queensland in Brisbane as well.
Mm.
I think it was in the days when you had to have a few young blokes because, yeah, because I was a long way from the first team, but they put me in a second 11 game when I was young. So
Right.
I was in the system, but I was very lucky. Dave Gilbert was the CEO at Cricket New South Wales at the time. And when Middlesex offered me a full-time contract, he was quite supportive in that. I think the New South Wales team at the time had, I remember going to training a couple of times. There were like 15 blokes or something that had played for Australia. So I was well aware that at that minute, my route into the first team, to the Sheffield Shield team was going to be pretty tricky. But at Middlesex, they offered me a contract. I was really keen to play. I loved Lords, loved county cricket. And so I sort of took it on, trying to forge a career in English cricket, but also knowing that, you just don't know in this game how long things are going to last. So I wouldn't say I did it thinking, right, I'm going to be here for the next 20 years, but that's just sort of how things have panned out.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's that rigorous qualification that one needs to do to be eligible to play, right? So you entered into that stream and had to sign that infamous piece of paper that says that you intend to play for England at the exclusion of all others. I know that was an option for Glenn Maxwell I think it was the year before he played for Australia, actually, and he was going to sign it, not really thinking much of the consequences, never thinking he'd play for the Aussies, and of course he ended up getting a gig with Australia not long after that, and the rest is history. But I mean, you're in the process of that qualification for a number of years, and in doing so, you're developing a reputation as a county pro, and before you know it, you're qualified in the middle of 2013, and this is another world that's available to you, despite having not grown up here. But you become eligible as an England cricketer. That must have been an interesting process to have gone through.
Yeah, well, it was. But as I think for me, by 2013-14, when, just before I toured with the Lions and whatever, I'd been in the system here for 5-6 years even. So, I was sort of well entrenched in the Middlesex team. I'd been living in London for a good few years. And by then I was sort of, this was the path that I'd chosen. It was probably more the first couple of years where I was a little bit up in the air and a little bit airy-fairy about things, just taking it in my stride. But once I was selected in the first team at Middlesex and sort of, or should I say, once I had established myself in the first team at Middlesex, I just loved it, mate. I think playing, and I'll probably keep going back to this. I think it was everything that came with cricket as well. I think, it wasn't just that things were going right on the field. It was, I liked life away from it. Build up a good network here and, living in London, playing at Lords, the whole package was just amazing, particularly as a young guy when it's all sort of new in those first few years. So, yeah, once I was entrenched in the first team, this was sort of the path that I was going to take, I think, in my mind.
So, and it's good timing, right? So, I mean, we actually referred to it on the pod the other week, the 100 you make in March in 2012 that gets referred to. I think every single March we are duty bound to say that you're the only player in first class history to have made a first class 100 in the month of March in England. So I suppose there's a degree of notoriety that comes via that. Would have been almost on this day by the time we're releasing this on the 30th of March. I think it was the 30th of March, wasn't it? Anyway, that's by the by. But in one of the university games, rest in peace, sad they no longer exist as first-class fixtures in some respects. But then 2013 is the year when you explode as a Middlesex player. You nearly top the country in Division 1 for runs, 1,200 of them at 47, a few hundreds. And now this is opening up for you. It's very, very quickly opening up for you in your early 20s where, as you say, you get the chance to tour with the Lions, and then England at the same time are capitulating in Australia. And, if you're having a good season in 2013 and you're in the next cab off the rank crew playing for the Lions, the fact that England did poorly in Australia, you suddenly became a very attractive player on the county circuit for England honours. And so it proved in the June of 2014. That's happened very quickly, hasn't it?
It has, yeah, it is. It's incredible to think it's sort of more than 10 years ago, or, just over 10 years ago now. I think you're right. I think the timing is everything, as it often is with selection. So, I had a good 2013. I was very lucky around that period, actually, because I had opening the batting with Chris Rogers, who was, he must have been about 35 at that stage, but they put him back in the team. I reckon it was for that summer, because I reckon they brought him back for that England home Ashes series. And I'd sort of been opening the batting with him the previous couple of years, which was an amazing experience because, he was on the top, right at the top of his game. captain of Middlesex, someone that I was sort of looking up to, and just helped me a lot with my game on the field, but just seeing him sort of in action really as another opening batsman and the way he prepared and all that sort of stuff. And then that's not to mention Andrew Strauss, who would play occasionally when he wasn't with England during those early years. So I definitely had great role models and great sort of guys to learn off and sort of pick their brains. I think a lot of the learning that you sort of do, you don't even know you're doing it. It's sort of subconscious. I mean, sometimes, you ask young players, you're picking things up, or, have you learnt much? And you can see them almost, they say, yeah, I have, but you wonder, do they actually think that? But I think you just subconsciously pick things up along the way. And I was able to do that with those guys. So, yeah, 2013 had a great season, and then played well for the Lions that winter. And as you say, the stars aligned really. And yeah, I mean, if it was a year later or a year earlier, the opportunity might not have come up, but it did. And yeah, it was great to get the call up.
Just to back over the Chris Rogers piece to all of this and how important he's been in your development. I know, of course, you've been friends for a long time now and batted closely together, but someone like Chris, who did it at the other end of his career and getting recalled to the Aussie team at 35, and of course you're in your early 20s at this stage and on your way through, and you've had very different journeys in many respects on that front, but having someone like him to draw down on the resource of someone who by that point probably had the better part of 60 first-class hundreds, it must have been such a great thing for you, opening the batting there week in, week out at Lords with a guy who had just been, as you say, recalled to the Aussie Test team.
It was, yeah. And I think the other thing with Chris, I think he was at a stage of his career where he'd probably actually maybe written off playing for Australia again, certainly when he joined Middlesex in 2011. And it just meant that we got a guy who was at the top of his game, a real star performer in domestic cricket here and in Australia, and really just wanted to win as well. So he was a great team man, great captain, and he was sort of what the club needed at that point, really, someone to really grab the bull by the horns and, and the younger players, of which I was one, sort of went with him and a couple of the other senior players as well. So, yeah, it was great. They were great years. And yeah, I think in your early, when it's early in your career and everything's new and exciting, it was great fun.
What a test to have played in, that test at Leeds in 2014, which of course goes right down to the wire. But earlier on in it, strumming 100 in your second test, I mean, it's the stuff that dreams are made of, walking out and doing it almost right away. Do you kind of look back at that from time to time and find yourself, I don't know, flicking onto the YouTube highlights of it or whatever? Because it must feel like it's in a parallel universe in some respects, given that it happened right at the start, and it is indeed such a long time ago.
Not really. I don't really think too much about it. I think maybe because I'm probably still playing, and when you're in your career, you're just sort of focusing on the next challenge ahead and the next season and whatever. So I don't really analyze it that closely or look back and think too much about it. It was a great, it was a great experience, great summer. I think it was the first test match that I found really full on, just because the build up and, when you just want to, someone like myself as well, I've loved cricket since I was a little boy. So I knew, that when I was selected to play a test match, I knew it was a big deal because it was something that I'd always wanted to do. And then it's there, and then you sort of have this big build up, 10 days or whatever, and family, friends, and people coming out of the woodwork. It felt a little bit almost like a party, really, the first test match. And it was all a bit of a blur. But I remember after that match actually thinking, right, I'm in this to score some runs and try and do a job. And so then I think that helped getting up to Leeds, getting away from Lords, where there was sort of less hangers on, if you like, and less sort of people watching and whatever. And yeah, just sort of treat it like another cricket game. And then after that it felt like more normal games, if you like, even though obviously they're big matches.
Yeah, and look, diminishing returns from there, I suppose, to an extent, but you do get runs at Lords, and it happens quickly, is the point I guess I wanted to make, that you get to the end of it all and they part ways with you at the end of the summer of 2014. But I mean, this is, again, this idea of it being a total whirlwind that you're caught up in some respects. And when you're leaving the England setup at that point, it can be quite a chastening experience when they start, as is often the way, rotating through a number of other players in your position, and you're now on the outer and thinking, Christ, how do I get back to that team again?
Yeah, I think it was a unique sort of a period as well. I think the World Cup was in early 2015 in Australia. So I think the whole winter, I don't think there were any test matches really. I think I played in 2014, and then I think the following tour was West Indies in maybe April or May the following year, which meant there was an A tour in between, which I sort of went on, and I think I might have got some runs in the tour match, but in the couple of proper games, or in my couple of, I think I had 2 or 3 innings and didn't get many. And Jonathan Trott came out on that and did really well. I think James Vince did well, and yeah, before you know it, as happens, you can sort of get taken over, and that's just how it is. So I was under no illusions. I knew that sort of I hadn't done enough to be a dead cert to be selected for the following tour, particularly with a big gap in between. But thought I might have done just enough to sneak on. So yeah, I suppose that, I think we were on a pre-season tour in Dubai with Middlesex when they selected the squad. And I remember thinking, I hadn't heard any bad news. And most of the news was quite positive. So I thought, I think I'm all right here. I think I'll get another chance, but wasn't to be. And you move on. That's life. And there you go.
Middlesex have an extraordinary season in 2016 and win the comp in Division 1. And you're a big part of the story at the start of the year, especially making a big double ton against Warwickshire. I remember I was there for that, and that all the talk was that you were going to get a recall. I mean, Nick Compton was on the way out. You were making runs, and it felt like you were going to get picked for that series against Pakistan, but they went the other way and picked Gary Balance, and I think they made one other change. Can't remember who it was anymore. But the point is that there was another window not long after that, within a couple of years, when you were still in and around England conversations, but doesn't quite go your way. And I suppose it doesn't at other points as well, when after Middlesex win the comp and you have a really strong season numerically, they go with Hasiba Mead to go to Asia, and Ben Duckett, and Mark Stoneman after that. So I guess as the years go by, after reaching the pinnacle, and we'll move off this topic in a moment, but just the idea of, having to reevaluate and reassess and redefine what success looks like. And I suppose in 2016, that was being part of a team that would win the comp for Middlesex and go down as a famous day at Lords.
Yeah, as you say, 2016 was very special. I mean, as a Middlesex player, that would be the highlight for me so far. In my career, to win the championships, it's a massive effort and a massive achievement. I think the more I played, the more I've sort of realised it and almost appreciated it more as time's gone on, really, because I think you can, you've got to be the best team, but you still need things to go your way along the way, and that was the case with us that year. I think I think we were, looking back, and I remember thinking at the time, I think we were the standout side, but we still needed some funky results. I think there was a win at Somerset that we had that was, down to a sporting declaration, actually by Chris Rogers himself. He was captaining Somerset, and we won that. And then the last game at Lords, I mean, that was something similar. I think Yorkshire needed to win as well. I think we both needed a result, and we came up with a deal where we both went for it, and it went our way. So yeah, great achievement to win the championship. Very proud to have done it with Middlesex, and I think, going back to your first point, I think there's been times where I've sort of put periods of good form together and felt a couple of times maybe I was half a sniff of getting back in the side, but basically haven't followed it up with really, really bumper years, which probably you need to almost force the issue, and you need a spot to be up for grabs at the time.
That final day at Lords, I was back in Melbourne at the time, but I remember texting Bucky after they'd won in 3 days, and that was his last first class game. Made twin hundreds, of course. Being Chris, of course, he ended up finishing his career with that staggering result down there, and then them knowing full well that you were going to set the game up. And remember the lob bowling that was needed to get things to where they needed to be for the suitable declaration. And it was on telly, and there was probably, there must have been 15,000 people, 20,000 people at Lords for that final day.
I think there was definitely that last afternoon. There was there was as many as I've I've seen for a 4-day game in my
Yeah.
last, my career. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was a special week. So yeah, great fun.
And look, Middlesex's fortunes as a team diminished for a number of years after that, which includes a period of time in Division 2 before going back up again. A little bit of yo-yo action on that front until we get to COVID, where it's that unusual conference system for a couple of years. And remember the first day of season 2021, where the only people in the ground were pretty much you guys out in the middle and us commentating, and not many more. There was no stewards or anything like that because there was no way to have crowds in there at the time. But you hit 100 on opening day. I reckon that was your 10,000th first class run as well, if memory serves me correctly. A beautiful 100 at that. The start of a really solid season at a time when it was an absolute fucking nightmare to bat at Lords. It felt like every game you guys were batting under lights, and it was just incredibly difficult circumstances. But how satisfying it was coming out the other end of that tough season and having numbers that reinforce that you still very much had a game that could match it with the best.
Yeah, I think you're right. 2021. Yeah, we had we did. We had a couple of tough years really after winning it. We went down in 2017 and then never really sort of recovered for a few years. We played some decent cricket, but yeah, we just sort of couldn't put it all together. And it was a tough few years. So, and then as you say, COVID was just a weird time. So I think by 2021, I think we had the Bob Willis cricket in 2020, but I think that was 5 matches and a couple of months cricket. It was good to sort of get out there, but there wasn't that much to it. So yeah, it was good to start 2021 well, and yeah, so we've had a funny period really since we won the championship, but I think we're in a pretty good place now. We we went down in 2023 after getting promoted in 2022, so that was a hit, but again, I think we weren't far off just staying up, and then we played really good cricket last year for the most part, but just couldn't quite get across the line to go up. So yeah, hopefully this year we can put it all together.
I'm interested in your perspective on the technical side of the game, and going back again to that reference point of 2021. I remember overhearing a conversation you were having with Mike Atherton at one point or another, and it was along the lines of batting next to the ball versus batting behind the ball. And your perspective was that, kind of what do you expect us to do in a competition where you are heavily incentivized to bowl 70-mile-an-hour wobble seam on the fourth stump line? You are kind of duty bound to almost get behind the ball and to give yourself a chance of avoiding or getting outside the line in the event to hit you on the pad. But it does mean that you kind of sacrifice the ability to, as a opener or any top order player, it just looks less good. You know what I mean? Like, it looks better when you're batting next to the ball and elegantly looking to drive, and as it might be in the MCC guide and so on. But you had to be a pragmatist as an opening bat to succeed at a time when the deck was so heavily in favour of medium pace bowlers, and many of them succeeded on green tops at Lords.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember speaking to Mike about that, and I think they might have done a piece on Sky a few weeks later, actually, which was on during a rain delay. I think we were playing Surrey at the Oval on TV as well when they did it. And you're right. I think there was a bit of a pattern there for a while, or a fad, or whatever you want to call it, where a lot of the right-handers were batting well across their stumps, towards off stump, and I think that guy even outside, and there were a lot of LBs, and the debate was, guys should be doing it like they did back in the day, batting back towards middle and leg stump and whatever. And I think probably a happy medium is the answer. But it is interesting, and I think a lot of it came from, you see world-class players like Steve Smith, and I can't think, a couple of other blokes come to mind. I'll think of them in a minute, that have had great success being a long way across and, trying to hit the ball through the leg side and whatever. And the view was that, it gives you a good understanding of where your off stump is, because you're so far across that if it's outside your eye line, you can just let it go. But obviously the problem is that it can throw your balance out a little bit, and if you do get hit on the pad, you're in trouble. I think the view of a lot of county players was that for a couple of years there, the wickets, they were really difficult, particularly if you're playing, as the season is now, at the start of the season, at the end of the season, then if you throw in tough weather and result wickets, it can be tough work. And I think the view was that you're going to get out somehow. And I think some guys got to the point where they were almost terrified to hit the ball through the offside. So they thought, well, I might as well get a mile across, and then at least if I can avoid getting hit on the pad, I'll squirt them through the onside and see how I go. But yeah, definitely it muddled a few guys up. But yeah, it's fascinating. I think also in county cricket, you have some quirky techniques, and you have guys playing so much. So whilst they're on the road trying to, work out how to get back into form, or when they're in form, working out why they're in form and how they can stay in form, it can create some pretty fascinating discussions. So yeah, it's always interesting, and it's actually good to have the commentators, their perspective on it as well. So yeah, I do recall that conversation though.
Where do you sit on the volume of cricket that's played in England? I know that the Professional Cricketers Association spoke quite a bit last year around challenges, more during the blast, I suppose, more than 4-day cricket, where you oftentimes were having to jump between grounds in a night. And from the perspective they were coming from, there was some dangerous travel done on motorways and whatnot. But zoning out from that, more about 4-day cricket when you're playing it in clumps, is it your view that they've already got the balance right with about 14 rounds, or would your view be more along the lines of, well, I suppose the competition you grew up watching in the Shield, where it's 10 rounds and the competition that's more aligned to that? Where do you sit on that question?
It is a tough one, just because there's just so much cricket now, isn't there? The 100, the blast, the championship, and then the 50 over comp behind the 100. So it's not easy. I think what you said at the start of that question, with scenarios where teams are driving here, there, and everywhere, late at night to get someone for the next day, I think that's not the right answer. You definitely don't want any of that. In terms of just scrapping, taking away 4-day games, that's a tough one. And I suppose everyone's got their own view, don't they? Depending on what sort of a player they are. For someone like myself who's not involved in the 2020 cricket really, but is a 4-day player, I still like 14 games, particularly in England, where I think games can be affected by weather, and there are some years where you'll have one in there where you hardly bowl a ball, and then a couple others that are heavily affected by weather. So, the talk of going back to, if you were to end up at something like 10, that to me just doesn't sound enough in English domestic cricket. So, and I also think one of the quirks and the sort of unique things about county cricket is the fact that you do play a lot, and that at the end of the season, it's tough work, and if you win the championship, it's bloody hard work over a long 6-month season. That's not always conducive to high performance cricket, and I get that. But I think somewhere in the middle is the right answer. And I don't think anyone's got the answer, because we had the PCA come and speak to us a week and a half ago, and it is just so difficult. There's talk now of, with the World Cup and not going to plan for England and so on, can you try and make, the 50 over comp more meaningful and play that another part of the year? But then that means something else has got to give. So I don't know the answers.
It's like a game of Jenga, isn't it? The England domestic schedule, and it's only been complicated yet further by the 100, which, let's be realistic, the 100 will be twice as long as it is right now by the time the new conglomerates have finished with it. You can be certain it'll be longer than it is at the moment. So that'll make it yet more complex, and how that intersects with 4-day cricket and the 1-day comp and of course the blast. And just on the blast, by the way, you said you're not a T20 player. Wasn't it the case that you've got the longest gap ever between blast games or something like that from memory, where you made a return to the side a few years ago to having not played for, was it over a decade possibly?
I actually don't know. That might be right. Yeah, that might be right. I can't help you there. If it is, I didn't know, but perhaps that could be the case. Yeah.
So there is still some white ball in you, of course, in the 50 over comp that gets played alongside the 100. So yeah, obviously primarily a 4-day cricketer, but have had that experience over time as well. But yeah, obviously the 4-day stuff's been where you've developed such a reputation. And look, last year as a senior player in the team, as a 34-year-old, you could say statistically it was your best yet, averaging 58. 400s. I know the batting conditions were dramatically better last year compared to some of those seasons we were referring to before, but I mean, it's not as though you've entered a period of decline or anything like it. You must feel quite buoyant about the season ahead from a personal perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in recent years I've felt good about my game, and I think as you get older, you're more experienced. You know your game and all of those things that senior players often say. But I think also another thing for me as an opening batter, I think the more you've played and whatever, even just little things like when you're a young bloke walking out, you're more nervous. So as an older player, you'd probably take your failures in your stride and
Mm.
just sort of crack on. And maybe when you're a younger player, you miss out a couple of times and you play a couple of tough games, and it's a little bit harder to come back from that. Whereas at this stage of my career, I sort of you have your good days and you have your bad days, but um, yeah, I've generally sort of been able to just keep it in perspective, maybe a bit better than you do when you're making your way. And yeah, I still feel like I'm playing as well as as well as I sort of have done, really. So as long as I can keep playing well and keep enjoying it, and feel like I'm helping the team, yeah, it'd be good to keep going for a while yet.
And keep doing that back and forth as well, right? I mean, the very fact that you most seasons find yourself playing quite a lot in Sydney club cricket, and of course those relationships you've had from the get-go, your age means that you're in a bracket of guys from New South Wales who have had extraordinary Australian careers. Steve Smith's the obvious one, who's someone who's come through the ranks with you at the same time, the big quicks we referred to before as well. So you still get your fill on both sides of the equator.
Yeah, I do. I haven't played as much actually for East in recent years. I would have liked in Sydney. Yeah, I played a couple of games the winter gone, and I played two. I think the winter before, or the English winter before that. So not as much as I would have liked, but I do. I enjoy playing there. I think it's still a great way for an English domestic player to spend their off season. It's good cricket, and you're outside playing. We've had a number of young blokes this year at Middlesex go and do it. A few guys are in Adelaide living together and did well and really enjoyed it. And they sort of come back, and you can tell that they're raring to go. They're in rhythm and they're playing, or they've been playing. Yeah, so no, I do. I love going back to play, and yeah, I think I'll keep trying to do it as much as I can, as long as I'm playing here. That's for sure.
But for the time being, and as I think I mentioned it in the very opening passage to this interview, you've got a testimonial year to enjoy. I mean, it's a bit of an old school, it's a lovely thing, the old benefit year, the testimonial year. I know it's different these days, and the reason that they were held in years gone by are different to what they are now. But not many pros get a testimonial year, right? I mean, you've been honoured with that by Middlesex this year, and that must make 2025 something that you're relishing entirely.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, it's a great honour. First and foremost, as you said, probably they're not quite what they once were. Yeah, I don't know how many players. I think Rory Burns has a testimonial year this year at Surrey. I'm not sure how many other players at the other clubs, but
Mm.
yeah, look, it's a great honour. As I said at the start of the podcast, I think when I first turned up at Lords, I thought it'd just be amazing to play a couple of games at Lords, for Middlesex. And so to have done it for over 15 years, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And yeah, to be awarded a testimonial year, it's something special. There's only a couple of sort of main events planned, but one of them's a dinner at Lords in November, which will be a special evening. So yeah, it's a great honour, and yeah, should be a bit of fun along the way.
Has it provided you with pause for thought? And this is not about trying to pension you off yet, Sam, but more about when the time does come that you don't want to walk out those gates and open the batting for Middlesex anymore, or when your life takes the next stage in whichever way, really, what you might be doing next. I know that that's not always the easiest question to answer for county cricketers. I've interviewed a number of players towards the end who found that quite difficult to grapple with because the schedule is so demanding, and the vibe of life, I suppose. You have to be so fixated on the here and now. But
Mm.
what do you think might be next for you? Do you expect you'll stay in cricket, or might you be more inclined to get away from it?
I'm not sure. It's a good question. I don't think coaching is necessarily for me. So um, yeah, in terms of trying to fall into a coaching role, I think that's probably not something I'll do. I'd like to go in a bit of a different direction. I would like to stay in sport though. What that would look like. I'm not sure whether that was in administration or, a commercial role involved in cricket or, another sport initially. I'm not sure. So, yeah, I've definitely given it a little bit more thought. I think you get to the stage where of your career where I'm at, 35, you feel like if you can play well, you could go for a few more years, and hopefully I can do. That's the plan. But by the same token, I'm under no illusions. You're a lot closer to the end than the finish, so I think you'd be foolish not to give it any thought. So yeah, I've been doing a little bit of thinking, the last couple of winters, but it's just so difficult because walking walking out for a net on a Thursday morning, then having a coffee afterwards with the boys. It's a long, it's a lot different to the real world, as a few of my mates outside cricket try and remind me. So, yeah, it's difficult to work it out for now, but yeah, we'll see how we go.
I suppose it keeps you young to an extent, hanging out with a bunch of, early 20s who are leading a very different life to you, who now, settled, snugged up nicely there in London and moving to the next phase of your life in other ways as well, that you've got these young blokes coming through like you were back in in the early 2010s, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even more so in the last sort of couple of years. Tim Murtagh stopped. When did he stop? Well, no, I was going to say last year, but he stopped the year before. Doesn't always feel that way because he's on the coaching staff. We see him most days, but I think the guys have started to stop. The other senior players, so it's myself and Toby Rowland Jones now as the sort of most senior statesmen, and we've got guys like Steve Eskenazi and Tom Helm are sort of a few years younger, but there's a good chunk of blokes that are 10, 12 years younger. So yeah, when you're standing with them having a pint on a Thursday or a Friday afternoon, and you look at them, you think, geez, these blokes are like 15 years younger. It's a bit scary, but no, it's good fun, and as you said, keeps you young.
And it's pretty clear you still love it as well. That like, this is the point that I've made with other cricketers on the show in the past. It can be cool to not to give the impression as a professional that you don't care about the game, or that it's your job but you don't pay any attention. Like you're more of the tradition of cricketer who really does pay a lot of attention to what's going on, in the competitions you're playing in, but wider than that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love the game. I still follow it closely all over the place when I can, albeit it's a bit harder to do so now. There's just so much cricket all over the world. It can be hard to keep up, even if you are a cricket lover, I find. But that's for another day, that chat. But look, I love batting. Love the challenge of trying to score runs and being out in the field. Sometimes like running the 2 kilometre time trial or the yo-yo test or beat test. Probably don't have quite the same passion for that I did 10 or 15 years ago. But absolutely, my enthusiasm for playing and being out there, hasn't diminished. So I'll keep doing it while I can.
Brilliant. Well, you've got a really exciting 25 ahead of you, Sam. So best of luck to Middlesex first and foremost, and hopefully you guys can get promoted, and to you as well. Hopefully you can have a season that's just as productive this year as it was last, if not better again. And thanks for joining us today as well. It's great to catch up with you in this format, given you've always had interesting views on the game, and I'm sure your contribution will continue long beyond the time that you've finally hung up that blue cap.
Thanks a lot, Adam. Thanks for having me.